The preacher's son who became the deadliest gun in Texas. His last words were, 4 sixes to beat. John Wesley Hardin was standing at the bar of the Acme Saloon in El Paso, Texas, shaking dice with another customer, probably feeling good about his role. Behind him, the door opened. A man walked in, drew his pistol, and before Hardin could turn around, fired a single shot into the back of his head. As Hardin crumpled to the floor, his killer fired 3 more rounds into his body. It was August 19, 1895. The most notorious gunfighter in Texas history died instantly, his hand still reaching for a pistol he never got the chance to draw. The irony wouldn't have been lost on anyone who knew Hardin's story. A man who'd killed at least 21 people, maybe as many as 44, depending on who you believed, died exactly the way he'd killed so many others. Shot from behind. No warning. No chance. The violent life demanding its violent end. John Wesley Hardin was born on May 26, 1853, in Bonham, Texas, about 70 miles north of Dallas. His father, James Gibson Hardin, was a Methodist circuit-riding preacher who named his second son after John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. The name was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to point the boy toward a life of faith, of service, of redemption. Instead, it became one of history's darker jokes. A preacher's son named after a religious reformer who became one of the most prolific killers the American West ever produced. Young Wes, that's what everyone called him, grew up in a Texas still reeling from the Civil War and the brutal Reconstruction period that followed. His family moved frequently as his father traveled his circuit, preaching in small churches and schoolhouses across East Texas. They settled in Moscow, Polk County, in 1855, then moved to Sumter, Trinity County, in 1859. Wes attended rural schools through about the 6th grade, which was fairly standard for the time and place. But his real education came from the world around him. Texas in the 1860s wasn't a gentle place. Confederate defeat had been devastating, economically and psychologically. Federal troops occupied the state. Reconstruction governments, backed by Union military might, tried to enforce new laws that upended the old social order. For many white Texans, particularly those from Confederate families, this felt like occupation by a conquering enemy. That resentment, that rage at having lost the war and now being forced to accept its consequences, poisoned everything. Wes Hardin absorbed all of it. He grew up hearing about the glories of the lost cause, about the injustices of Reconstruction, about how the world was supposed to work, and how Yankees and freed slaves were ruining everything. This wasn't unusual. This was standard thinking for white Southern boys of his generation. But in Wes, it combined with something else, a hair-trigger temper and an absolute unwillingness to back down from any confrontation. In 1867, when he was 14, Hardin got into a fight with another boy at school over a girl. He stabbed his opponent twice with a knife, nearly killing him. That should have been a warning, a sign that this kid had violence wired into his nature. But nobody seemed to read it that way. Boys fought. Boys carried knives. This was Texas. A year later, the warning became impossible to ignore. In November or December of 1868, accounts vary on the exact date, 15-year-old Wes got into an altercation with a freedman named Mage, who was significantly older and larger than the teenager. They were wrestling, which sounds almost innocent until you understand the context. A white kid and a black man, in Texas, in 1868. with all the racial hatred of that time and place bubbling underneath every interaction. The wrestling match got heated. They were separated. Hardin went home. But he didn't let it go. He couldn't let it go. The next day, or maybe that same evening, again accounts differ. Hardin found Mage on the road and shot him dead. 3 times, center mass. 15 years old, and Wes Hardin had killed his first man. His justification, told years later in his autobiography, was self-defense. He claimed Mage had threatened him, that Mage was armed, that he had no choice. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was complete fabrication. What we know for certain is that a black man was dead, killed by a white teenager, in Texas during Reconstruction, when racial violence was epidemic, and justice was whatever the man with the gun said it was. The consequences came fast. Not legal consequences. Hardin was never charged with Mage's murder, but practical ones. Reconstruction authorities backed by Union troops were looking for him. In Hardin's telling, 3 Union soldiers came to arrest him at his brother's house. He killed all 3. Then he killed another soldier at a different location. Within months of his first killing, Wes Hardin was claiming 5 dead men, all of them connected to his refusal to face consequences for shooting Mage. Here's where we have to talk about Hardin's autobiography, because it's our primary source for much of his early life, and it's notoriously unreliable. Hardin was a liar. Not an accidental exaggerator, not someone who misremembered details. A deliberate, consistent liar who inflated his kill count, invented heroic circumstances for murders that were actually cold-blooded, and portrayed himself as a noble Southern gentleman forced into violence by circumstances beyond his control. Military records don't support his claims about killing Union soldiers. Newspaper accounts from the time don't mention most of the incidents he described. Historians have been able to confirm maybe half of the killings Hardin claimed credit for. The rest? Who knows? Some probably happened but aren't documented. Some were outright inventions. Hardin wanted to be remembered as the deadliest gun in the West, and he was willing to lie to secure that reputation. What we can confirm is that by 1871, 18-year-old Wes Hardin was working as a cowboy, hired to boss a cattle drive up the Chisholm Trail to Abilene, Kansas. This was legitimate work, dangerous work, hard work. Driving 2,000 head of cattle across hundreds of miles of open country, dealing with stampedes and river crossings and hostile Indians, and weather that could kill you as easily as outlaws could. But Hardin was good at it. He was tough, fearless, skilled with horses and cattle. He was also a walking disaster waiting to happen. On June 1st, 1871, Hardin arrived in Abilene and met the town marshal, Wild Bill Hickok. This was the Wild Bill Hickok, already a legend, a man who'd killed multiple people in gunfights, a lawman with a reputation for being fast, accurate, and absolutely willing to shoot you dead if you gave him cause. Hardin and Hickok struck up what Hardin would later call a friendship, though wary mutual respect might be more accurate. Hickok was 16 years older and seemed to take a paternal interest in the young gunslinger. Maybe he saw something of himself in Hardin. Maybe he just recognized a dangerous kid who needed watching. Either way, Hickok didn't try to arrest Hardin for the Texas warrants that were already piling up. Professional courtesy, perhaps. Or politics. Hickok had no jurisdiction over Texas crimes. and starting a gunfight with a kid who was obviously skilled and crazy might have seemed like more trouble than it was worth. On July 20th, Hardin got into trouble at the American Hotel. The room next to his was occupied by a man who snored loudly. Hardin, possibly drunk, possibly just being Hardin, knocked on the wall and told the man to stop. The man told him to go to hell. So Hardin shot through the wall and killed him. This is the origin of one of the most famous lines in Old West history. Years later, Hardin complained, "They tell lots of lies about me. They say I killed 6 or 7 men for snoring. Well, it ain't true. I only killed 1 man for snoring." As if that clarification made it better. As if admitting to one murder for something as trivial as snoring somehow exonerated him from the larger crime of being a psychopath with a gun. Hardin knew Hickok would come for him over this. Friendship or not, killing a man in a hotel for snoring crossed a line even Wild Bill couldn't ignore. So Hardin climbed out his hotel window in his underwear, spent the night hiding in a haystack, stole a horse at dawn, and rode out of Abilene. He never returned. Years later, he'd claimed that Hickok would have killed him to add to his own reputation. Maybe. Or maybe Hickok would have just arrested him and sent him back to Texas for trial. We'll never know. What we do know is that Hardin returned to Texas and continued his violent path. In 1872, he married Jane Bowen. She was 17. He was 19. They'd eventually have 3 children together: Molly, John Wesley Jr., and Jane, who they called Jenny. By all accounts, Hardin genuinely loved his wife and children. When he wrote letters from prison years later, they were tender, concerned, filled with affection. The man who could shoot someone through a wall for snoring could also be a devoted husband and father. People contain multitudes, even terrible people. But marriage didn't calm him. If anything, having a family made him more dangerous, because now he had something to protect and defend. He got involved in the Sutton-Taylor feud, one of those sprawling Texas blood feuds where everybody was related to somebody, and grudges went back generations. Hardin sided with Jim Taylor and the anti-Reconstruction faction. In July of 1873, he killed J.B. Morgan, a lawman working for the Reconstruction government. Then he killed Jack Helm, the leader of the opposing faction, shooting him down in the street. On May 26, 1874, his 21st birthday, Hardin was celebrating in Comanche, Texas. He'd just won money on a horse race and was drinking in the local saloons. That's when he encountered Charles Webb, the deputy sheriff from neighboring Brown County. What happened next depends on who you ask. Hardin claimed Webb drew on him first, that he was defending himself. Witnesses said Hardin murdered Webb in cold blood. A jury would later believe the witnesses. The immediate aftermath was chaos. The crowd turned on Hardin and his companions. They had to shoot their way out of town. But worse was coming. Local vigilantes, outraged by Webb's killing, grabbed Hardin's brother Joseph and 2 of his cousins from jail and lynched them, strung them up, and left them hanging as a message. This is what happens when you kill lawmen in our county. Hardin fled Texas with his wife and children. He used the alias J.H. Swain and settled first in Florida among Jane's relatives, then moved to Pollard, Alabama. For a while, he tried to live quietly. He had 2 more children. He worked at legitimate jobs, but he couldn't stay out of trouble. In Florida, he killed at least 1 more person and was involved in several gunfights. The Texas Rangers were looking for him. Rewards were offered, and eventually, inevitably, they caught up to him. On August 23, 1877, in Pensacola, Florida, Texas Ranger John B. Armstrong and local lawmen confronted Hardin on a train. Hardin tried to draw his .44 caliber Colt, but it got caught in his suspenders. The lawman knocked him unconscious before he could free it. One of Hardin's companions pulled a gun and was killed immediately. Just like that, after 9 years on the run, the most wanted man in Texas was in custody. He was tried in Comanche for the murder of Charles Webb. On September 28, 1878, he was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in Huntsville prison. He was 25 years old. If he served the full sentence, he wouldn't get out until he was 50. Prison should have been the end of John Wesley Hardin's story. Most men who entered Huntsville in that era either died there or came out broken. But Hardin did something remarkable. He transformed himself. Or at least, he appeared to transform himself. The reality was probably more complicated. At first, he was exactly what you'd expect. Violent, rebellious, desperate to escape. In 1879, he and 50 other convicts were caught hours before successfully tunneling into the prison armory. They'd been planning to seize weapons and stage a mass breakout. Hardin was punished severely. He made several other escape attempts. Each time he was caught and beaten. But eventually something shifted. Maybe he realized escape was impossible. Maybe he genuinely changed. Or maybe he just got smart enough to play the game. He joined the prison debating society. He attended Sunday school and eventually became its superintendent. A Methodist preacher's son returning, at least outwardly, to his father's faith. He read theological books, and most importantly, he studied law. Hardin had access to legal texts, probably arranged through outside lawyers who were working on his case. He read everything he could find about Texas law, about criminal procedure, about appeals and pardons. He was intelligent, nobody ever questioned that, and he channeled that intelligence into learning a profession that might let him survive in legitimate society if he ever got released. In 1892, Hardin managed to leave prison temporarily when he pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the 1873 killing of J.B. Morgan. He got a 2-year concurrent sentence, which let him travel to Cuero for the hearing and see his family. It was probably the highlight of his incarceration. A few months later, Jane died. The woman who'd stuck by him through everything, who'd raised their children while he was locked up, died while he was still in prison. He never got to say goodbye. On February 17, 1894, after nearly 16 years behind bars, John Wesley Hardin walked out of Huntsville with a full pardon from the governor. He was 40 years old. He'd gone into prison as a young man and come out middle-aged, with gray in his hair and scars that went deeper than the 17 bullet wounds his body carried. On March 16th, he was officially pardoned. On July 21st, he passed the Texas bar examination and became a licensed attorney. Think about that for a moment. The man who claimed to have killed 42 people was now an officer of the court, sworn to uphold the very laws he'd spent his youth violating. It should have been a redemption story. The outlaw reformed, using his hard-won education to serve society instead of terrorizing it. But Hardin couldn't escape who he was. Or maybe more accurately, he couldn't escape who he'd been. He tried to practice law in Gonzales, but nobody wanted to hire a lawyer who was more famous for murder than jurisprudence. He ran for political office and lost. In January of 1895, he married a 15-year-old girl named Callie Lewis. The marriage collapsed almost immediately. By the middle of 1895, Hardin had moved to El Paso, a violent town on the Mexican border where law was more suggestion than reality. He set up a law practice that barely functioned. Mostly he drank, gambled, and got into arguments. All his old patterns, all his old demons reasserted themselves. Prison hadn't changed him fundamentally. It had just contained him for 16 years. He took up with a woman named Beulah M. Rose, who worked as a prostitute. She was, according to some accounts, the wife of Martin Moroz, one of Hardin's clients who'd fled to Mexico. When Moroz found out about the affair, he came back across the border under promise of safe passage from lawman George Scarborough. Instead, multiple law officers killed him in what looked like an assassination. Rumors spread that Hardin had hired them to murder his rival. On May 1, 1895, Hardin lost money gambling at the Acme Saloon. He pulled his gun and forced the dealer to give him his money back. He was fined $25 for gaming, and his gun was confiscated. For a man who'd built his entire identity around being dangerous, being disarmed by the law must have felt like emasculation. In August, El Paso police arrested Beulah M. Rose for carrying a gun in public. The arresting officer was John Selman, Jr., the 21-year-old son of Constable John Selman, Sr. Hardin confronted the young officer. Words were exchanged. According to some accounts, Hardin pistol-whipped the kid and threatened his life. According to others, it was just an argument. Either way, the elder Selman heard about it. John Selman Sr. was 56 years old and had led a life almost as violent as Hardin's. He'd been a Confederate soldier, a vigilante, a rustler, an outlaw who'd led a gang called Selman's Scouts that terrorized New Mexico. He'd killed at least a dozen men, probably more. He'd been on both sides of the law so many times nobody could keep track. Now he was a constable in El Paso, and someone was threatening his son. On the afternoon of August 19th, Selman and Hardin had an angry confrontation on the street. Both men made threats. Both men walked away. That should have been the end of it. Two old gunfighters, too smart to push things to violence, letting words substitute for bullets. But Selman couldn't let it go. Or maybe Hardin had threatened his son too explicitly to ignore. Or maybe Selman was being paid by people who wanted Hardin dead. That rumor would circulate for years. That night, Hardin went to the Acme Saloon and started shaking dice at the bar with another customer. His last words, 4 sixes to beat, suggest he was having a good time, focused on the game, not thinking about threats or danger. He was 42 years old. His fastest days were behind him. He'd spent 16 years in prison. He probably felt safe in El Paso, a town where everyone knew everyone. And old gunfighters were supposed to be left alone to drink themselves to death in peace. Shortly before midnight, John Selman walked into the Acme Saloon with his Colt 45, serial number 141805. He walked up behind Hardin. He drew his gun. Hardin may have seen him in the mirror behind the bar. He may have been reaching for his own gun, we'll never know, because Selman shot him in the back of the head before he could turn around. The bullet entered behind Hardin's left ear and exited through his right eye. He died instantly. As his body hit the floor, Selman fired 3 more rounds into him. Thorough, professional, making absolutely certain the most dangerous gun in Texas wouldn't get back up. Hardin's hand was on the grip of his holstered pistol, a Smith & Wesson Frontier Model 4440. Whether he'd been drawing it, or it was just resting there, nobody could say for certain. Selman's lawyer would later argue at trial, if Hardin was shot in the eye, it was excellent marksmanship. If he was shot in the back, it was excellent judgment. The jury hung. Selman was released on bond pending retrial. But the retrial never happened. because on April 6, 1896, Selman was killed in a gunfight with U.S. Marshal George Scarborough. Same man who'd been involved in the Moroz killing. Same pattern of violence, begetting violence, begetting violence. John Wesley Hardin was buried in Concordia Cemetery in El Paso. Hundreds attended his funeral. Curiosity seekers. People who wanted to say they'd seen the notorious gunfighter laid to rest. The same crowd that had flocked to see the famous murderer when he was transported to prison in 1877. Americans have always been fascinated by violent men, by outlaws, by people who live outside society's rules. His autobiography was published posthumously, first in 1896, and then in a fuller edition in 1925. It's full of lies, exaggerations, and self-serving justifications. But it's also one of the most interesting documents we have from the Old West, because it shows us how a killer thinks about killing, how he rationalizes it, how he constructs a narrative where he's always the wronged party, always acting in self-defense, always justified in pulling the trigger. What do we do with John Wesley Hardin's legacy? He was a murderer. That's not debatable. At least 21 people died by his hand, probably more. Some of them were lawmen doing their jobs. Some were men he killed in arguments over cards or dice or snoring. He was violent, racist, cruel, and utterly lacking in the kind of empathy that keeps most people from shooting each other over petty slights. But he was also a product of his time and place. Texas in the 1860s and 70s was extraordinarily violent. The Civil War and Reconstruction created conditions where killing became almost routine, where young men grew up believing that violence was how you solved problems, where drawing a gun was a reasonable response to being insulted or threatened, or just looked at wrong. Hardin wasn't unique in his violence. He was just better at it than most people, and more willing to own it. His transformation in prison, real or performed, raises questions we still struggle with. Can people change? Can a man who's killed more than 20 people become something other than a killer? Hardin studied law, read the Bible, seemed to want a different life. But within a year of his release, he was back to drinking, gambling, threatening people. The prison didn't reform him. It just delayed the inevitable. There's a photograph of Hardin taken shortly before his death. He's wearing a suit, looking respectable, every inch the attorney he'd become. But his eyes are hard. The face is lined. You can see violence in him still, coiled and waiting. That photograph captures the essential paradox of John Wesley Hardin, a man trying to be civilized while remaining fundamentally savage. He died as he'd lived, suddenly, violently, shot by another man who'd spent his life pulling triggers. His last words weren't profound. They weren't a reflection on his violent life or an apology to his victims. They were about dice. 4 sixes to beat. Just another game, another bet, another moment that seemed ordinary, right up until it became fatal. The Methodist preacher who named his son after John Wesley died having watched that son become one of the most notorious killers in American history. The education, the religious upbringing, the moral instruction, none of it took. Or maybe it took too well. Creating a man with enough intelligence to rationalize anything, enough charisma to make people believe his lies, enough skill to survive longer than he had any right to. John Wesley Hardin claimed to have killed 42 men. Historians confirm at least 21. The truth is somewhere in between, lost in the same fog of lies and legend that surrounds most of the Old West. But this much is certain. He killed people. A lot of people. And then he died the same way, shot from behind by a man who'd decided the world would be better off without him. Maybe he was right. If this story of the Old West's deadliest gunfighter made you think about violence, legacy, and whether people can truly change, hit that like button. And if you want more deep dives into the complicated lives of historical figures who shaped America through their actions, good and bad, subscribe to Cold Tales. We'll keep bringing you stories that don't have easy answers, because history rarely does. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.